Bailey said she had to
Are all
cheat.
men like that, dude?
Yeah, I think we are.
I go to the doctor. I like to get well quick. But you're doing better.
Yeah, I'm doing better.
Good. We're glad. Good to see you. Been absent for a while. Tonight we're going to have a very unique class. Now we're going to talk about something tonight that we don't ever talk about because we're going through the Bible. And we just finished, we started in August of 2022 with Genesis 1 verse 1. And the reason we're doing this is because I don't want to be a preacher and I don't want us to be a church that just talks about our favorite stuff. God inspired the whole Bible, right? And so it forces me, when we go through all of Scripture, and we're doing overviews of the books, main themes, what they're about, how to interpret them, that kind of thing, it forces us to get into a text that we're not really familiar with. And I'm familiar with all of the Bible. I've read every book in the Bible more times than I can count. But still, we're going to talk about something tonight that most of us don't talk about or read. In fact, how many of you have ever heard a sermon or a Bible class on Song of Solomon? Jakey, one or two? Okay, we got 2, 3. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, not a real high percentage. And Song of Solomon, if you call it, it's either called Song of Solomon or probably a better name is Song of Songs, as we're going to see. And what that means is this is the Song of Songs. This is the greatest of all the songs that Solomon wrote. In fact, if you will read 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 32, it says that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs. And so what he is saying is this is the greatest of all of those songs. What Song of Solomon is, it's a poem. Actually, it's a collection of poems. And what it's about, it's on the joys of the intimate married life. It's loaded with intimate, racy married language. We're going to look at some of the imagery tonight, but the rest of it, I'm going to let you read it on your own. Because it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination in some of it to get what he's talking about. But he's using imagery, he's using a bunch of metaphors. In fact, I don't know if you knew this or not, but did you know that young Jewish boys were encouraged to memorize? They memorized, some of them memorized the whole Old Testament. Isn't that amazing? But easily they would memorize the Torah, like Genesis through Deuteronomy. And they were encouraged to memorize all of the Old Testament except for one book. Do not read. They were forbidden until their bar mitzvah when they turned 13. Bar mitzvah means son of the law, or son of the commandment, when they became old enough to make their own decisions in life and decide which way they're going to go. They were forbidden to read this book. They were forbidden to memorize it. In fact, I found out recently that even some of the Jewish sages would forbid people from reading it until they were 25 or 30. And if you read it's a short book, but if you read the book, you can see why. But at the same time, it's a series of poems about Jewish married, about the intimate delights of being married. A lot of people don't think this ought to be in the Bible. I'll never forget a person from our church years ago was not mad at me, but was kind of angry that this book was in the Bible, and kind of questioning me why it's in there. And I'm like, hey, I didn't put it in there, but God did put it in there. And it's in there for a reason, which we're going to talk about tonight. So instead of shying away from it, this is a part of our Bible. It's a part of Scripture. So we need to look at what he's saying. So here's a drawing. I mean, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, this is from the Bible Project. If you're not familiar with that, you can just look it up, BibleProject.com, and it has videos on all the books of the Bible, and it gives overviews by drawing. They'll start off on the left over here, and they'll start drawing this, and they draw the whole way. This gives you an idea of what the book of Song of Solomon is about. Basically, it is a series of poems, not one poem, it's a bunch of poems, about a couple. Part of it is when they are engaged and they're looking forward to the time when they can be together. Part of it is the time when they are already together. And there's all these poems in this metaphorical Hebrew language when they're sharing with one another about how they would like to express their love to one another. That's what the book of Song of Solomon, that's what the whole thing is about. In fact, I found this quote, I like this one. It says, Song of Solomon is a collection of snapshots of their courting and married life with the pictures not necessarily in order. And that's exactly what it is. I like things to go linearly, don't you? Start here and go linearly that way. That's not what's going on in Song of Solomon. That's what makes it somewhat confusing. But if you spend some time like I did this week and you really focus on it and you're taking notes and everything while you're reading the book, it's not that difficult to understand kind of how it's organized. It just kind of flips back and forth between the wife is talking, or in some cases, you know, the one that the girl who's engaged, and she's speaking to the one she's engaged to. Other times they're already married. Sometimes the husband's talking. Sometimes the wife is talking, and they're using all of this metaphoric language. If you look down here, it's hard to see right here. But what is love poetry doing in the Bible? That's what that says right there. And there's basically three views of this. Some think the whole thing is just a metaphor. It's not meant to be real love poems, you know, from a husband to his wife or a wife to his husband. It's just a big metaphor of Israel in the church, Israel and God. This is what the Jewish people think. Israel is the bride and God is the husband. That's what it's about. Another tradition, which is the Christian tradition, or at least some Christians think, it's a big image, it's a big metaphor about Christ, who would be the husband, and the church, which would be the bride, which is biblical in the New Testament. But taking a New Testament passage like Ephesians 5 and making this mean that, I don't think is wise. I think here's what it is. When you read the book, I don't think there's any doubt. These are actual love poems between from a husband to his wife, and from a wife to his husband, and from people who are engaged at also talking to one another. I think that's plainly what he's talking about. Look at this verse right here, chapter 6, verse 8 and 9. 60 queens there may be, and 80 concubines, and virgins beyond number. But my dove, my perfect one, is unique, the only daughter of her mother, the favorite of the one who bore her. And the young women saw her and called her blessed. The queens and her concubines praised her. We all know that Solomon, or if you don't know, you know when you read Scripture, 1 Kings, you'll find this out. Solomon had. Does anybody remember how many wives did he have? It's 300 and 700. It's either 300 wives and 700 concubines, or 700, one or the other. Anyway, he had a bunch. Can you imagine trying to please all those wives and keep up with all them and all that? Think about the to-do list, right? Wow, that'd be something else. I think what he's saying, what very possibly could be going on here, this is possibly early in his life when Solomon is writing, before he acquired all these wives and concubines. And he's expressing his love to his first love. It could be that, or some scholars think it could be Solomon after he made all the mistakes. The Bible records he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Simply because the Bible records it doesn't mean it's endorsing that. Does that make sense? The Bible records a lot of things they're true, that happened. That doesn't mean God's saying, this is what I recommend. He's just saying this is what happened. So it could be that Solomon, later in his life, after he married a bunch of foreign women, and you remember they led his heart astray, it could be that he is looking back on his life and he's giving advice here saying, that's not the way to do it. The best way to do it is what is reflected in these series of poems, that you give your devotion to one woman that you're married to, and you live with her. Somebody have a comment? Somebody say something? No? Okay. Anyway, I think that's the best way to read it. So we're going to leave this up for a second, if you can see that. You just see it's kind of a confusing book, but it goes back and forth. This husband and wife are pursuing one another. They're writing these love poems to one another. And so I want to give you a sample of some of the figurative language that is in this book. Turn to chapter 4 of the book of Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, I think is a better way to call it. Song of Songs means this is the greatest of all the songs or poems that Solomon wrote. So chapter 4, we're going to read the first 4 verses. How beautiful you are, my darling. This is Solomon, this is the husband writing a poem to his wife. How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn sheep, which have come up from their watering place, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your lips are like a scarlet thread. Your mouth is beautiful. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with layers of stones, on which are hung 1,000 shields. And he goes on and on and on. There's other places he says, your nose is like the Tower of Babylon, leaning toward, this is all metaphorical language. It's how they talk then. It might not sound that romantic or poetic to us, but keep in mind, he's not writing to us. He's writing to them in Hebrew metaphorical language. Now, what this is I'm going to make an important point here in a minute for us. This is the husband, or could be on this occasion, could be the groom-to-be. He is expressing his appreciation and showing his love towards his wife or his fiance. Okay? Now, turn to chapter 5. Chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 10. This is the bride expressing admiration towards the husband. Chapter 5, beginning in verse 10. My beloved is dazzling and reddish. That's what ruddy means. If your version says ruddy, ruddy means reddish, that reddish hair. Outstanding among 10,000. His head is like gold, pure gold. His locks are like clusters of dates and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk and perched in their setting. His cheeks are like a bed of balsam, banks of herbal spices. His lips are lilies dripping with drops of myrrh. His hands are rods of gold set with topaz. His abdomen is panels of ivory covered with sapphires. His thighs are pillars of alabaster set on pedestals of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is full of sweetness. He is wholly desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, you daughters of Jerusalem. Once again, you have this poetic language using a bunch of Hebrew imagery. Now, here's what you have going on. You have the bride, first of all, is expressing great appreciation and compliments towards the husband. And then in the section we just read, you have, or first it was the husband. In the section we just read, now you have the bride expressing compliments towards the husband. So they're both expressing compliments towards one another. Now here's a lesson for us that I think is very important. I think it is easy, the longer you go on being married, where you forget to show appreciation to your spouse. We forget to express our love to them and our appreciation for everything they do. I think that's very common. If you think back to when you were dating, do you remember when you were dating? Some of you are like, I can't remember that far back. But you remember when you're dating? You're in gaga land all the time. You couldn't wait to be with your girlfriend at the time before they became your spouse. You wanted to talk to them on the phone all the time. You wrote them letters and that all the time. And we would easily express appreciation to them. If you've been married, like Mike and Gwenda were here on Sunday. Their wedding anniversary was Monday, 66 years. And Joe and Eloise have been married, what is it, 120, Jakey? How close? Pretty close. Is it for real, like 75, something like that? 76, been married 76 years. Now, I'm not saying this is happening with them, but it can happen with those of us, like us, for example. Our be 35 years this summer, and others of you in here have been married 50-something years. I think, when it goes on for a long time, even if it's only been 10 years, let's just say for you, or 5 years even, the fizzle and the pop, or whatever you want to call it, can go out of it if you're not careful. So we need to make sure that we're constantly expressing appreciation for our spouse. Now, let me show you something that I want to bring up, because this is important. Because I've heard of people say, well, this is just saying that, a sexual relationship with anyone is fine. Well, let me point something out. If you turn to chapter 4, We're not going to read it, but I want you to notice something. Chapter 4. I underlined all these in my Bible. Chapter 4, verse 8, verse 9, verse 10, verse 11, verse 12, and chapter 5, verse 1 all say, my bride, my bride, my bride, my bride, my bride, my bride. This is not talking about any kind of sexual unions between people who aren't married. This is talking about married love. That's important, especially in our culture, right? Because there are people who misinterpret that. So you just go and camp out in chapter 4 into chapter 5, verse 1. You'll see him mention my bride, over and over and over again. So these are poems of married love or the anticipation of the joys of married love. Okay, let me stop right here and see. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Mentioned in 5, before we started in 10, 9 is about the friends telling her, tell me what you like, and reminding you about the things that you like about him.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be doing and encourage one another, instead of, I've been there, you don't compare your relationship to other people's relationships, but you have eyes. You can see, what a marriage couple, when someone's actually joined together, a family, him and her are in unison.
You can
They
see
are
when
in
they're
harmony, right?
They're
You can tell.
doing it well. They're
Right.
doing life together.
And as members of the church, we should continue to encourage other marriage people to remind them what they have, and not let it fizzle out.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what the friends did.
Right.
Tell us about, remind us, tell us about him. That way you can have reminders of why you like him so much, and not just in that way, but in a friendship way too.
Yeah.
As well.
Because a husband and wife should be friends. It's more than that. It's obviously a lot deeper than that, but you should be friends, right? Okay, that's good. Good, Josh. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Okay, let's go to something else. Here is a verse that as I was studying this week, I've never noticed this before, but it jumped out at me this week. 3 times throughout the book, this same phrase is repeated. Don't excite love, don't stir it up until the time is ripe or until love is ready. He says that in chapter 2, verse 7, says it again in chapter 3, verse 5, says it again in chapter 8, verse 4. Now, here's what he means by that. This is a warning against premature, forced, or careless intimacy. He's saying don't engage in physical and emotional commitment before a foundation of marriage is in place. It is so common in our culture today, and I hate to say it, but it's common in churches. So common for people to say, well, we need to live together and be physically united with one another to see if we're compatible. That is not biblical. That used to be that everybody in the church understood that, didn't it, Jakey? Didn't it, John? Didn't it, Chip, Eugene? Everybody understood that back in I'm not saying y'all are old, but back in the 50s, that was the way it was, right? And it was a shameful thing if someone was found to be living together. How often did that happen? I wasn't around. How often did it happen in the 50s?
I wasn't around.
You weren't around the 50s? Come on. I don't think it happened some, certainly.
Though, in the 60s, not 50s, when a girl got pregnant, they went to live with someone else. They left town.
Yeah, it was a shameful thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just become so commonplace now. It's so accepted, and it's accepted in the church. Now, I'm not saying, and certainly we don't want to treat people hatefully, we don't treat people in a Christ-like way, but some things are right and some things are wrong still. Just because they're accepted in our culture doesn't mean they should be accepted among us. And plainly, what this whole book is showing, he's talking about the joys of intimacy in a marriage setting. And he says right here, don't excite love, don't stir it up until the time is ripe. And the time is ripe when you're married, is what he's saying. And there's plenty of passages in the New Testament that say the same thing. We need to hear that. We need to encourage people who show good examples of that. There's some young people at our church who have gotten married recently who have shown a good example of that. Refused, like Zach and Victoria. They didn't move in with each other until they got married. No, we're not doing that. No, we're not going to do that. That's not right. It's not right in God's sight. No, good for them. Good for you. There's somebody who got it. And I'm sure there was pressure from whoever, their friends and maybe, whoever they knew, well, you need to make sure you're compatible. That's not God's way. And unless I'm not looking at things right, it looks to me like our way in America is not working all that great. So I think it'd be a good idea to go back to the biblical pattern. So I found this quote: "A strong desire to express love physically should be present, but not until marriage should it be fulfilled." Of course, you are attracted to the one that you are your boyfriend or girlfriend. That's why they're your boyfriend or girlfriend. And there's not a thing in the world wrong with that. That's part of it. But he's saying for that physical union to be consummated, that's only in a marriage context. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that right here. But let me stop right here, see if anybody has questions, comments.
It feeds off of Ecclesiastes. So we already just went through that of the wisdom and everything under the sun and how we're supposed to see things, and he knows. I mean, Solomon knows. Yeah,
that's a good point you brought up. Under the sun, the whole book of Ecclesiastes he's writing this Hebrew poetry is what Ecclesiastes as well, but it's about, here's the point of view without God. And the point of view without God is what is largely in vogue in our culture today. And that point of view in this area says, just move in with one another. I'll never forget this. A couple, a long time ago at another church, this was a couple that was going to our church. I didn't know them very well, but they wanted to get married. And they were my age. At the time I was, probably like 40 years old or something like that. And they said, we want to come visit with you. And so we're visiting and we're talking and everything. And come to find out they were living with each other. And I just started asking them some questions. And the guy, 40-year-old man, okay? Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but most 40-year-old men, this is not going to work for them. So I said, well, we're living together. And the man said, yeah, but there's nothing going on. We're just living together. And I said, I said, well, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, so y'all stay in separate bedrooms? He said, they kind of started looking sheepish. I said, no. I said, so you're sleeping in the same bed? I said, yeah. And I said, so let me get this straight. I said, so what you're telling me is, I said, this is your girlfriend, your fiance. You're attracted to her, right? And he looked, yeah. I said, so you're telling me that y'all are in the same bed and the only thing that's going on in your house is you're eating together and watching TV together. That's it? I said, come on, man. And he kind of, like that. That's the way the world is. And unfortunately, the world has crept into the church. Brothers and sisters, we have been called to be holy, haven't we? 1 Peter 1:16, be holy as I'm holy. Holy doesn't mean to have a holier than thou attitude looking down on other people. That's not biblical. But it means God's called us to live different. He's called us to a different standard of living. And this is a higher standard than our society. It's a different standard, but it's a biblical standard. Okay, let me show you something that's interesting. I'm not a Hebrew expert, not nearly as good at Hebrew as I am at Greek, but I still do know some Hebrew. There's 3 different words for love in Hebrew. Hebrew reads right to left, so let's start with this one right here. Start over on the right over here. This is re'ah, and that word means neighborly or brotherly love or poetic infatuation. Like in our culture, this would be when you first see a girl and you fall in love with her and you're head over heels for her. It's just that feeling, you can't think straight. You can't hardly work or anything, right? You know what I'm talking about? We've all had that. Fortunately, that doesn't last very long. We've all had that, but if it did last a long time, you couldn't function. You couldn't do your job. You couldn't sleep. Nothing. Typically, this lasts no longer than a year and a half. That's what the experts say. But there's that kind of love. There's this kind of love, which is ahava. Ahava is a commitment through thick and thin, no matter what. This is that married love. Say, we are, for better or worse, in sickness and health, and in poverty and wealth, and good times and the bad, no matter what happens. That's ahava. And then the last kind of love is dode, and that means that's the sexual erotic love. He mentioned that word is used in chapter 1, verse 2, and chapter 1, verse 13. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit. In America, the college culture, let's just say it that way, college culture engages in this kind of love, the dode, the sexual erotic love, after brief reah, which is that infatuation, but there's no ahava. There's no commitment. That's pretty common in our culture. Wouldn't y'all agree with that? Hey? Ancient cultures didn't do it that way. Here's how ancient cultures did it. Ancient cultures started with ahava, the commitment to one another. And then when they were committed, when they got married, that would lead to obviously the sexual erotic love. And eventually that would then lead, last of all, to the reah, or the infatuation, the fireworks, or whatever you want to call it with us. That's completely backwards of the way that we do it. Now, our culture, if you think about a wedding ceremony, for example, there's all kinds of planning and expense and hoopla and everything, and all the decorations and all the food, and all that stuff, and the wedding venue. Nobody gets married in a church building anymore, hardly ever. And it may cost, cheap ones, $20,000 probably, right? It can go to, no telling how much, but even normal people spend $20,000. Laura and I know somebody that was Tiffany's age back in Kentucky when we lived there. Had a real expensive wedding, real fan. They were divorced in just 3 months or something like that. After all this real, all this expense. That's what our culture focuses on. But here's the truth, biblically. What a wedding ought to be all about, what it ought to be celebrating is not reah, it ought to be celebrating ahava, the commitment. We are making a commitment to each other. The most important part in the wedding ceremony is what? It's vows. That is by far the most. In fact, that's all you really have to say. Now, I usually say a lot more than that, leading up to it, the biblical basis for marriage and all that. But the main point is, hey, let's get to the point where we're committing to one another. And we're making that commitment before God and before people, and it's meant to be taken seriously. Do you remember the story? Turn in your Bible to Genesis chapter 24 for a minute. I usually use this in a wedding. This is the best example in the whole Bible. Here's how they did it in ancient cultures. They didn't date like we do today, or find someone, on an internet site. That's not how they did it back then. Back then, you typically, a lot of times, wouldn't even know the person in many cases. And the parents would arrange the marriage. And, of course, you had a say-so in it. You could agree to it or not agree to it. But sometimes you didn't even know them. Well, on this occasion in Genesis 24, Abraham is looking for a bride for his son, Isaac. And he did not want to get a bride from the land that they were living in. He wanted one from the land that they were from. So he sends his servant, and he says, my angel will go with you, and God will show you the one to pick. You remember that? And so he goes to this faraway land, hundreds of miles away. They have never met, and he finds this girl, Rebecca. It's a distant relative of their a relative. That's how they did it back then. She's never seen Isaac in her life. They've never FaceTimed one another. They've never texted. They've never been out on a date. And so through a series of talking to the parents, will you agree to come way back to this person you've never seen? Yeah, I agree to be his wife. So she makes a long trip back with Abraham's servant. And she sees Isaac for the first time, and I want you to notice what this passage says. Look in Genesis chapter 24. We're going to read verse 67. Genesis chapter 24, verse 67. Then Isaac brought her. They just met one another. She just gets off the camel after the long trip. They've just seen each other for the first time. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now, here's the point that I want to make, that I make in a wedding ceremony. When you talk to couples, you know, if I'm doing marriage counseling with a couple, like I did not too long ago, why do you want to get married? Because we're in love. Now, I'm not, you know, nothing wrong with that, okay? But that's usually what. That's not what this says. The love came after the wedding. Did you notice that in this text? He says, Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, he took Rebekah, she became his wife, and he loved her. He loved her after. I mean, the commitment to be married came, you know, that came, it wasn't based on, this wasn't based on the bells and whistles and the fireworks and all that. There was no sexual erotic love for it. It started with this. It started with the commitment. Then it went to the sexual erotic love of a married, committed couple. And then later, there was this, the fireworks went off, right? That's the way they did it. Now, I don't know about you, but it looks to me like their way of doing it works better than our way. And I think there's a powerful lesson there for us. So I'm going to make 5 points here real quick. But I want to stop right here real quick and see if anybody has any comments. Okay. I had some people the other day say, well, I'm sorry, you know, there's a bunch of guys that are on a fishing trip right now. And they were saying, well, sorry, I'm not going to be there for Song of Solomon. I'm like, yeah, how are you going to get a lesson out of that? Well, pretty easy. I was reading this week about I forgot the guy's name, but it was an ancient preacher. He preached, you're not going to believe this, he preached 68 lessons on just the first 3 chapters of Song of Solomon. Now, I don't think I could do that, but I could preach quite a few lessons on Song of Solomon. Well, here's just a few big overviews that I see from the book. These poems celebrate married love, but there is a gift of celibacy for some. Now, this is an important point. Brothers and sisters, we need not to look at people who are single as if they're weird. And I think our culture has a problem with that. God gives some people. Go read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7, and go read Matthew chapter 19, verse 10 through 12. God gives some people the gift of celibacy. And so when we see a 40-year-old man or a 40-year-old girl, young lady, 45 or whatever it is, and they're not married, we should not think, what's wrong with them? God gives that gift to some people. And we need to make sure as churches that we don't just make this a place just for married people, right? Because God makes different kinds of people. Does everybody understand? We want all people to feel included. God includes them, and certainly He wants us to include them. It's hard for us to lead our culture in how to view sexuality if we don't talk about it. Now, here's the point I'm making. There are preachers who will get fired just from saying what I've said tonight about bringing up Song of Solomon, which is in the Bible. This is a public book meant to be read for public consumption. And God put this in the Bible. And if you go read it on your own time, there's some real racy, steamy stuff in there. But it's between a married couple. For us never, you know, I've been told before we should never talk about those. We should never bring that up. Well, apparently God disagrees with you. I think we need to be teaching our culture about what biblical love is rather than us adapting to our culture ourselves. Another point. Our sexuality is a part of who we are. We are holistic beings, and to ignore that and not address it is not holistic discipleship. We are whole beings. You can't compartmentalized. Well, this is this part of me and that part of me. We are whole beings. And anytime something affects one part of your being, does it affect every other part? Absolutely. Anything, one part affects all the whole because we are holistic beings. And since the Bible explains how to live, it discusses a whole wide range of life situations. So it's appropriate to think that it's also going to talk about human sexuality, which is part of being a human being, right? I'm going to pause for a minute. I got one more slide. Questions or comments?
We don't talk about it.
I think there are probably different reasons, but I think a lot of people's view is it's not holy. That's not holy to talk about. It's not reverent to talk about. And at a church, we need to be holy and reverent, which I would agree we need to be holy and reverent. But apparently, holy and reverent doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about that in the appropriate way, right? Which is what he's doing here in the book of Song of Solomon. So we just need to be biblical in our approach to things. I think that's why it is. Anybody else have any idea why we don't talk about it? Or
People just don't want to bring the ideal up as if it's not already there.
yeah,
You know, they just don't. I don't want to like encourage or get the thought to happen in young people's minds. And it's like it's already there. It doesn't matter if you're talking about it or not. It's already there.
But Mike, also, a lot of times what we do by not talking about it, we are discouraging that part of the relationship that God thought it was beautiful, that He created for ourselves.
and I wonder sometimes if people, who come in here, a preacher like me talk or a Bible class teacher or something, and say they're there at a church for years and they never hear this subject brought up. I wonder if in people's minds they're saying, don't y'all think that's a legitimate topic to bring up? I mean, isn't that like something that's kind of a main thing in people's lives? I think it is. Yeah. Like Josh said, go read the Old Testament, not just Song of Solomon, and not just the Old Testament. Go read 1 Corinthians chapter 7. If you haven't read that recently, go read the first 7 verses of 1 Corinthians 7. Paul's words, not mine. Just look at what he said. He said husbands and wives need to meet one another's needs. And he's not talking about taking out the trash, okay? Or doing the dishes. That's not what he's talking about. Just go read the text. Yes?
I think it's important too because of what everyone's saying, but I just remember when we would talk to our boys about it, as they're growing up, and at first when you're having the first sex talk, they're like, shocked and scared and laughing, and then they start bringing up things that they've seen on the news or this, different words that they've heard at school or things like that. And it was very important to me that Chris and I both told them it's the world that makes this ugly. It's not. It's not supposed to be.
Exactly.
It's not ugly at all. It's the world and it's sin, and they're using it as a weapon or to hurt someone or this. And that is not what it was. And I feel like that changed the way they viewed that. And we just always left it open, but I wanted them to know that it is not ugly.
That's a good point. And I think going back to Josh's point, why did we not talk about it? I think because we have that view that it's ugly or dirty or whatever, and Christians shouldn't talk about that. That's just not true. We need to talk about it in the appropriate way. Good point. I appreciate it. 2 more points. The 3 kinds of love that we just looked at just a second ago are meant to be experienced together. And when they are not, it's dysfunctional and destructive. Now think about that for a minute. We looked at those 3 kinds of love. There was ahava, the commitment. There was dode, which is the sexual erotic love. And there was the reah, which is the bells and whistles. You can't stop thinking about the person. Those are all meant to be experienced together. And so here's what we all need to think about. Whatever your situation is, whether you're married like me, whether you're dating, whether you're engaged, or whatever the situation, or whether you're not even dating or engaged or any of that, is there one of those that is left out of your marriage? They're meant to be together, or left out of your situation, whatever it is, whether you're dating or married or whatever. If one of them is left out, like with a dating couple, Like in America, it's typically the hookup kind of culture, right? You're leaving out ahava. And it's dysfunctional and destructive when you do. Or with a married couple. You know, maybe there's the ahava, the commitment, but if you're leaving the others out, that's destructive and not what God wants and dysfunctional. So we all need to ask ourselves, is there something that's being left out of my current relationship? I think that's a good question for us to ask. And last one is this. This is what Casey was just saying. Healthy intimacy within the context of marriage is beautiful and it's God's design. We need to hear that. This is why God has this in the Bible. You go read it for yourself in your private time. There's some very sexually charged language in here, but keep in mind, it's between a husband and a wife in an ahava, committed married relationship. This is God's design. It's not dirty. It's not ugly. We need to hear that. There are churches that teach wrongly, but they teach the only purpose for intimacy between a married couple, the only purpose is to bear children. That is not in Scripture. That is a purpose, but that is not the only purpose. As you see plainly in Song of Solomon, it's to enjoy one another. And this is God's design. Healthy intimacy within the context of marriage, that's key. Within that context, it's beautiful and it's God's design. Anything else outside of that context, you're violating God's will, and it's ultimately going to be destructive. It might be fun, might be pleasurable, might seem all right at first, but there are consequences. And God wants our life to go well here. This is why He gives us these guidelines. Okay, we have 1 minute left. Does anyone have a follow-up? Did it at least help you to see a big, broad view of what the book of Song of Solomon is about? That's kind of what we're trying to do in these studies. We're not going through every verse in the text, obviously, but we're just giving big overviews, how to interpret the book, what it's about, and some of the key themes. And I hope that did it for you tonight. Okay, next week is a prayer service, and then after that, James Hill will start teaching on the book of Isaiah. Appreciate it. Hope everybody has a blessed night, and we'll see you all here on Sunday.